Hi, boys and girls. We are on to chapter 3 of Ramona Quimby, age 8. This is my favorite chapter in the entire book, and one I probably remember the most from when Mrs. Bailey, my third grade teacher, read it to me. It's called the hard-boiled egg fad. A fad is something that occurs when it becomes popular over time, and something that is practiced over and over again. With all 4 members of the house leaving at different times in different directions, mornings were flurried in the Quimby household. On the days when Mr. Quimby had an 8 o'clock class, he left early in the car. Bezus left next because she walked to school and because she wanted to stop for Mary Jane on the way. Ramona was third to leave. She enjoyed these last few minutes alone with her mother, now that Mrs. Quimby no longer reminded her that she must be nice to Willa Jean. "Did you remember to give me a hard-boiled egg in my lunch?" I asked, Ramona inquired one morning. This week, hard-boiled eggs were popular with third graders, a fad that was started by Yard Ape, who sometimes brought his lunch. Last week, the fad had been individual bags of corn chips. Ramona had been left out of this fad because her mother objected to spending money on junk food. Surely, her mother would not object to a nutritious hard-boiled egg. "Yes, I remember the hard-boiled egg, you little rabbit," said Mrs. Quimby. "I'm glad to see you finally learned to like them." Ramona did not feel it necessary to explain to her mother that she still did not like hard-boiled eggs, not even when they'd been dyed for Easter. Neither did she feel like soft-boiled eggs because she didn't like the slippery, slithery food. Ramona liked deviled eggs, but deviled eggs were not the fad, at least not this week. On the bus, Ramona and Susan compared lunches. Each was happy to discover the other had a hard-boiled egg, and both were eager for lunchtime to come. While Ramona waited for lunch period, school turned out to be unusually interesting. After the class had filled out their arithmetic workbooks, Mrs. Whaley had handed each child a glass jar containing 2 inches of a wet blue substance. He's chewing something more. Hang on, guys. Murphy's got something in his mouth. Okay. She explained that it was oatmeal dyed blue. Ramona was the first to say yuck. Most people made faces, and Yard Ape made a gagging noise. "Okay, kids, quiet down," said Mrs. Whaley. Then the room was quiet. She explained that for science they were going to have to study fruit flies, and the blue oatmeal contained fruit larvae. "And what do you think the oatmeal is blue? And why do you think the oatmeal is blue?" she asked. Several people thought the blue dye was some sort of food for the larvae, vitamins maybe. Marshall suggested that oatmeal was dyed blue so that children would not think it was good to eat. Everybody laughed at this guess. Who would ever think that cold oatmeal was good to eat? Yard Ape came up with the right answer. The oatmeal was dyed blue so that the larvae could be seen, and so they could, little white specks. As the class bent over their desks making labels for their jars, Ramona wrote her name on the slip of paper and added age 8, which she always wrote after her signature. Then she drew tiny little fruit flies around as she pasted the label on her very own jar of blue oatmeal and fruit fly larvae. Now she had a jar of pets. "That's a really neat label, Ramona," said Mrs. Whaley. Ramona understood that her teacher did not mean tidy, but she meant neat as an extra good. Ramona decided she liked Mrs. Whaley after all. The morning was so satisfactory that it passed quickly. When lunchtime came, Ramona collected her lunchbox and went off to the cafeteria, where after waiting in line for her milk, she sat at the table with Sarah, Janet, Marcia, and other third graders. She opened her lunchbox, and there, tucked in a napkin, snug between her sandwich and her orange, was her hard-boiled egg, smooth and perfect, the right size to fit in her hand. Because Ramona wanted to save the best for last, she ate the center of her sandwich, tuna fish, and poked a hole in her orange so that she could suck out the juice. Third graders did not peel their oranges. At last, it was time for the egg. There were a number of ways of cracking eggs. The most popular, and the real reason for bringing an egg to school, was knocking the egg upon one's head. There were 2 ways of doing so, by a lot of little timid raps or by one giant whack. Sarah was a rapper. Ramona, like Yard Ape, was a whacker. She took a firm hold of her egg, waited until everyone at the table was watching, and whack! She found herself with a handful of crumbled shell, something cool and slimy running down her face. Everyone at Ramona's table gasped. Ramona needed a moment to realize what had happened. Her egg was raw. Her mother had not boiled her egg after all. She tried to push the yellow yolk and slithering white out of her hair and away from her face, but she only succeeded in making her hands eggy. Her eyes filled with tears and anger, which she tried to brush away with her wrists, and gasps at the table turned to giggles. From another table, Ramona caught a glimpse of Yardape grinning at her. Marcia, a tall girl who always tried to be motherly, said, "It's all right, Ramona. I'll take you to the bathroom and help you wash off the egg." Ramona was not the least bit grateful. "You go away," she said, ashamed of being so rude. But she did not want a third grader treating her like a baby. The teacher who was supervising the lunch period came over to see what the commotion was about. Marcia gathered up all the paper napkins from the lunch boxes at the table and handed them to the teacher, who tried to sop up the egg. Unfortunately, the napkins did not absorb the egg very well. Instead, they smeared the yolk and white all around Ramona's hair, and her face felt stiff with the egg as it began to dry.